Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. And while everybody knows all about the T95/FV4201 Chieftain, the tier 10 British reward tank, that there's a lot of them going around on the battlefield right now, as 8,000 of them were just put out on the European server alone from Clan Wars rewards. That vehicle is kind of this pseudo-American British design to have that collaboration to enable the interchangeability of the turrets and the hulls, but it's just not a Chieftain, right? The only true Chieftain that's available inside World of Tanks is the Chieftain Mark 6, although this vehicle, while it's been in the game files for years and years and years, must be at least 5 or 6 years now, is actually only available on the Chinese server, which is why today is very exciting, and that is that Wargaming are currently super testing an FV4201 Chieftain prototype that is looking like it could go into the game at tier 9. Now firstly, let me clarify once again that characteristics are not final and we may never even see this vehicle going into the game, and all I have is this image of it. So I went around and did a bit of digging, and it looks like the awesome Tank Museum in Bovington about 10 years ago managed to save one of the original Chieftain prototypes. And clearly, if we go and take a look at the kind of the comparison here, yeah, we can clearly see what Wargaming is basing this on. And while there were undoubtedly significant changes as the vehicle went from being a prototype through 6 different iterations of the Chieftain, from the shape of the hull and also the lack of the mantlet, which was something that they kept very secret during early development, it's looking like the Chieftain Mark 6 might be going in to a lesser degree at tier 9. So very exciting stuff. Although very conveniently, Wargaming have actually only provided this image of the prototype, which hides the weak point which the Chieftain Mark 6 has towards the top, and it's a fairly easy one to hit. So before any of you get excited, this might be Wargaming very conveniently hiding a horrible crown on top of a weak point, but maybe they just haven't decided yet whether they actually want to have a weak point on top of this tank or not. So Wargaming provided us with an infographic, but to get you a more realistic idea of how the vehicle is going to stack up compared to its tier 9 competition, I've taken it and put it on, like in true QuickyBaby fashion, onto an Excel document. So now I'm going to be comparing the Chieftain prototype to the Conqueror, the other British tier 9 heavy tank, and also the Concept 1B. So immediately we notice that the firepower, the 120mm gun that all 3 of these tanks use, is identical. However, the ammunition that they use is not. And the Chieftain prototype, as we can see here, actually has APCR rounds as standard, a lot like the FV4201 Chieftain T95 at tier 10 reward. So maybe, just maybe, you're going to get really nice shell velocity like you do get on the Concept 1B. And also, it has a slight penetration advantage at 262mm. However, the gold penetration, while they're APCR rounds, they're much worse than the Conqueror's rounds at only 310 compared to the Conqueror's 326. And remember that the Concept 1B gets heat, which is definitely an advantage in itself. It's really nice to have high explosive anti-tank rounds to be able to go through some thin but still well-angled plates. Because remember, heat can penetrate up to 85 degrees of angled armor, whereas armor-piercing rounds and APCR rounds will bounce off at 70 degrees and above, unless they overmatch, and you're not really going to be overmatching much with 120mm. One thing that I'm going to love about this tank, if of course I'm ever going to be able to get my hands on it, is that it has 120mm of HESH ammunition, or just high penetration, high explosive, whichever it's going to be, and that will allow you to reliably clap weakly armored targets for 515 a pop. Now, unfortunately, for the prototype Chieftain, it only fires 5 rounds a minute, which is worse than the Conqueror and significantly worse than the Concept 1B, giving this vehicle a base damage per minute of 2,000. Yeah, that's a little bit lackluster at tier 9, but maybe this tank is going to have statistics in other areas that make up for it. So how about the gun handling? Having a 120mm would suggest it's going to have pretty darn good gun handling, as it's not a very large caliber gun for a tier 9 heavy. 0.36 accuracy, it's not great news. It's much worse than the Conqueror, and its aim time is worse than the Conqueror as well. But at least the accuracy is a little bit better than the Concept 1B, but that is not great accuracy for a heavy tank, and it's one of the weaker aspects of the Concept 1B. Depression, elevation on these vehicles is pretty much identical, as is the turret traverse. The dispersion when moving at 0.12 is as good as the Conqueror, and the turret reverse dispersion at 0.08 is as good as the concept. Accordingly, it looks like you're probably going to be able to forego using vertical stabilizers on this tank unless you truly want to just be able to snapshot like an absolute boss. And when you factor in the vehicle's aim time of 2.3 seconds, some of you probably will want to end up using vert stabs, but I'm definitely going to drop them on this tank personally. So now let's move on to the mobility. A 750 horsepower engine, something that the Chieftain didn't actually get until several versions into its status. So it's a bit weird for me that I believe the original Chieftain only had about a 465 horsepower engine, that this prototype is actually getting a 750 horsepower engine, which wasn't actually available on the tank until many iterations down the line. But you know, historical relevancy in World of Tanks, they're only guidelines, right? And honestly, if this thing did have a 460 horsepower engine, it probably wouldn't even really be worth playing. The weight of the vehicle is a flat 50 tons, significantly heavier than the concept, but significantly lighter than the Conqueror. The power to weight ratio is better than the Conqueror, but massively worse than the concept. The top speed limit on this tank is 35. That's not great. The reverse speed is 12. That's really bad. When we look at the concept going at 45 forwards and 18 backwards, and the fact that the concept gets a field mod that allows you to increase that by 4 kilometers an hour as well, means that this prototype is going to be very, very, very sluggish compared to the concept. So far we found out it's got probably worse overall firepower apart from the high explosive rounds in the concept. Its gun handling is barely any better, and the vehicle is massively slower. It better have something good. Well, I can tell you it's not really the hull armor. 80mm at the front, 60 at the side, and 35 at the rear doesn't look very good. However, that upper hull is likely to be very well angled, so maybe it's only your lower plate that will truly end up being a weak point on this vehicle, apart from maybe against some high explosive anti-tank rounds if you're not using your gun depression. But ye gods, boys and girls, it looks like this speciality is going to be the turret armor. 350mm of turret armor on the front of this vehicle, which is the same as the Chieftain, the T95 Chieftain at tier 10. So maybe what we are going to be seeing here is Wargaming putting in the most god tier turret at tier 9, which absolutely nothing is going to be able to penetrate unless, of course, they hit the top weak point, and that is if you aren't using your gun depression. But again, we're going to have to wait and see whether Wargaming are going to be putting the big weak point on this true Chieftain turret, like the Mark 6, which will give it a horrendous weak point that all of your opponents will be able to deal with. My gut instinct is, considering that the statistics of this vehicle are as bad as the Conqueror or much worse than the Concept 1B, if they do give it a weak point and they don't give it that thick tier 10 turret armor, then it's just going to end up being a worse tank than the other two in this comparison. So I expect that Wargaming are going to be trialing this currently on the super test, and yeah, my gut instinct is that it's going to have the tier 10 Chieftain turret at tier 9, and that's why they're giving it worse statistics in all of the other areas. But even with these worse statistics in all of the other areas, I can tell you this thing will end up like an absolute beast if it does have that god tier turret at tier 9, for all the same reasons that the AE Phase 1 does well at tier 9. Add to this 1,950 hit points, which will give the vehicle more durability than the Concept 1B, and 400 meters view range, which will mean that the vehicle ends up not needing to use coated optics as long as you've got a good crew and field mods. And yeah, statistically this thing is looking like it's going to be quite strong. The only thing that really alarms me about this vehicle is it doesn't really look like it's too different to the Conqueror or the Concept 1B. And do we really need to just have more and more and more of the same tank going into the game with these absolute god tier turrets? And while we don't know for certain, most likely complete lack of weak points. So how do I see Wargaming putting this vehicle into the game? Well, that's a real tough one, considering that the Battle Pass is currently in effect and we're not going to be having another one with new reward vehicles for at least another year. I have an absolute sneaking suspicion that this one could end up being a tier 9 premium tank and not a reward vehicle. And if Wargaming do that, then you can tell that Wargaming are seriously wanting to make some cash from their tier 9 premium status, as they're undoubtedly pulling out the big guns, and this is the one that so many people have been asking for so long. The fact of the matter is there's so many things that Wargaming can do with this vehicle. really they could put in a whole new line of British heavy tanks. A reward from some event that you have to grind, or maybe even a possible future reward for the next season of Ranked. But now that the precedent has been set for premium vehicles, yeah, I can't help but think that maybe Wargaming might be trying to get after the big bucks with this one. All in all, the tank is neither here nor there. It's a real tough one to talk about, because obviously the most competitive tanks at tier 9 are vehicles like the Concept, vehicles with decent turrets and okay gun depression like the AMX M451, the Emil 2, the Stridsvagn K, and even the Conqueror and the A Phase 1 still towards the top of the list, whereas all of the other ones that don't have the good turrets and don't have the good armor are way down towards the bottom of the list. And so if we were to see the vehicle go into the game with an even better turret than any of the other vehicles, without it having outrageously worse statistics in all of the other areas, this thing might just be adding to the whole down, broken, heavy meta problem. But remember, everything is subject to change. Wargaming might nerf the statistics massively, and also it might have a huge weak point on the other side of the turret. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments whether you think that this Chieftain prototype is going to have a weak point, whether you think that it's going to end up as a premium tank. How do you see this one going into the game, and how do you see the statistics ending up, or do you think that they're more or less final to begin with? And how much cash would you be willing to pony up if this thing ends up being a premium tank in the game? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.